I did want to ask you also, though, about some unrelated things that are going on the left right now, since you're one of the only left electeds that is willing to come on these kinds of shows.
I don't get that. I don't. I mean, I understand, sometimes I get questions that are harsh and I read the comments and my staff, don't read all the comments or something. So maybe people just read all the comments. But I think, that someone said to me, because and they said, Ro, it's good you go on, because even if people are criticizing you, I respect you for going on. And I will just encourage more of my colleagues to go on. I think that the right has done a much better job of going on non-traditional online media to build a base. And I think we have to do that. And one person can't do that. I think we ought to have 15, 20 members of Congress, senators going on these types of programs.
Well, I hope they hear you. And next time you're chit-chatting by the office cooler, if you want to tell Cori Bush, AOC, Mondaire Jones, whomever it is, to come on, we'd love to have them.
Yeah.
But one thing I did want to ask you about was, the left has been curious about your decision to weigh in on the New York Senate race, where the DSA endorsed candidate, Kristen Gonzalez, has a new challenger in the form of Nomiki Konst, who is, herself, embedded in the left media world, has previously run for public advocate in New York and is known to many in this arena. And she was part of a community on the left that was very critical of the Force the Vote movement, largely because it was considered to be divisive, that it was dividing the left. And now some people are saying that she's doing the same by entering this race where there was a clear progressive candidate. You have endorsed Nomiki Konst. And I will also know, on a personal note, one of the first articles I ever covered for The Intercept was about your endorsement of Joe Crowley over AOC back in the day, and then the revised kind of dual endorsement. So what has caused you to weigh in this race, and why Nomiki?
Yeah, well, for the AOC thing, I'm proud I'm the only member who actually did endorse her in that race. A dual endorsement by admission, but I did endorse her, and obviously that turned out to be a correct bet given all that she's contributed. Oh, Nomiki, I've known Nomiki. Nomiki, when I won for Congress, had a tweet that criticized me because I had beaten my conduct. And then we actually struck up a conversation and friendship, and both became huge supporters of Bernie Sanders. As you know, she's been a very strong supporter of Senator Sanders. And I got to know her in my involvement in the Sanders campaign, but also before that in calling on Senator Sanders to run. And she started an organization that was encouraging working mothers to run for office. So I don't know her opponents. I don't know New York politics, obviously, that well. And I've heard only good things about her opponent. I mean, no disrespect her. I've just worked with Nomiki a lot on progressive causes, and particularly in support of Senator Sanders and some of in her work when she was at the Young Turks, and that's why I endorsed her.
But can you tell me a little bit more about the endorsement process, though, Representative Khanna? Because it does seem to me, certainly in this space, folks are going to make friends and people are going to have personal relationships. But that shouldn't necessarily translate into an endorsement, especially when, per your own admission, you're not particularly engaged and are knowledgeable about what's going on in New York state politics. And there is a candidate in the race that seems to have gotten the endorsement and support of the progressives in the state who are very engaged in progressive politics. Isn't one option just to sit this one out?
It is, and usually I do sit out most races in places that I don't know well. And I don't just endorse friendship, though, of course, I am partial to people who supported Bernie Sanders. I mean, I have to admit that that's a criteria that weighs heavily on me. Jonathan Jackson in Chicago, I'm endorsing him, partly because of the work we did. So the line I draw is that if I know someone well and we worked in progressive causes together, and if they were to support Bernie Sanders, I will endorse them, but I won't campaign against other people in the race and won't be active in that if there are other good progressives. And I actually don't know. Maybe her opponent also supported Bernie Sanders. I
believe she did. It would be hard to imagine that a DSA candidate was supporting, Pete Buttigieg or whomever in the 2020 primary. You know,
it's a tough situation, but you work with people on the Sanders campaign or other things, and other causes, and you respect them, and it's more an affirmation on an individual than against. And by and large, let's just be blunt. I mean, unless you're Barack Obama or Bernie Sanders, maybe in some cases Elizabeth Warren, obviously Joe Biden, these endorsements don't move that many people. It's more a sense of what you stand for.
I think the fundamental question is, do you think it's advisable in situations like this? I mean, we all just saw what happened, how difficult it is for left candidates, generally speaking, in these races when they're going up against, centrist candidates that are often backed by big money interests in the Democratic Party. We saw what happened recently with Senator Turner. We saw the efforts that were taken against Lee in Philadelphia with DMFI and AIPAC and millions of dollars being raised for her opponent. And so when you see a progressive have a campaign with legs on it, like we do here in New York, and there is a solidified progressive base behind her, one has to make the question, do you think it's useful for additional progressives to hop in the race and divide what is already a marginal vote in many parts of the country?
I was proud to support Lee Summers. I'm very proud and endorsed her, supported her. Proud to have supported Erica Smith, who didn't quite make it in North Carolina, and other progressives across the country. When Senator Turner, I supported her the first time. I stayed out of it the second time, which I talked to her. I thought it was a mistake for the caucus to get involved in that race and had made that clear. And I personally did not. It's hard against an incumbent, but you can certainly stay out. And in this case, I wouldn't have gotten involved if it weren't for another strong progressive. Nomiki thought it's a new district. She thought her experience benefits that. I don't think you can say there's only one progressive, right? I mean, even in a presidential election, there are maybe two or three progressives. I think the key is, though, how can you coordinate so that we don't have a situation where the progressives start attacking each other and someone else emerges. And that, I think, is what the progressive movement has to figure out is how do we create space when there are multiple progressives all offering good perspectives for that not to lead to a centrist establishment candidate winning.
So Representative Khanna, in the case of Senator Turner, I would argue that Shontel Brown wasn't even a progressive. And yet you sat that one out for the sake ostensibly of the Progressive Caucus's endorsed quote unquote progressive candidate. But in this instance, when there is a genuine progressive at play, you're choosing to weigh in. Do you see how there are some who might say the friendship with Senator Turner, the fact that she's given so much and worked so hard for Bernie Sanders, the decision-making, if anything, should have been to come out against the Progressive Caucus in the Ohio 11th race and to sit out this New York State Senate race?
Well, look, these things aren't perfect, but I had a long conversation with Senator Turner, which you could ask her about, and I was proud to endorse her the first time. I explained in the case of Shontel Brown, she was a member of the Progressive Caucus. She had come out for Medicare for All. It's very, very hard to endorse against colleagues in your own party, let alone your own Progressive Caucus. And what Senator Turner was very okay with that position. What she wanted to make sure is that the Progressive Caucus didn't endorse Shontel Brown, and that was a mistake. And we should make sure that that doesn't happen again. In this case, you don't have a congressional person involved, and so it's different. It's just the politics are different because you have to get people in your caucus together on voting for legislation. And in this case, Nomiki, I think, is genuinely a progressive. From all of the interactions I've had, she was enthusiastic Bernie Sanders supporter, enthusiastic supporter, working class folks running for office. And so I'm proud of her campaign. I acknowledge that this other person, I know now from Twitter that the other person has a lot of supporters. So I wish her well. I don't have anything against her, and certainly I'm not trying to oppose her in any way.
Well, the last thing I want to ask you about, because I know we're a little time limited, is whether you are aware of some of the journalistic pushback that Antony Blinken got at the America's Conference this past week. Abby Matin, who is a journalist that we've interviewed on this show, asked him about some of the inconsistencies in his speech about press freedoms and wanting to have strong relationships with countries that respect those kinds of press freedoms, and America's relationship with both Israel and Saudi Arabia following the murder of American Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, and also, of course, Jamal Khashoggi. Did you see that exchange?
Secretary Blinken, what about Shireen Abu Akleh? She was murdered by Israeli forces. Right? CNN just agreed to this. These are your two greatest allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Israel. They have murdered American journalists, and there have been absolutely no repercussions. And you're sitting up here talking about the freedom of press and democracy. The United States is denying sovereignty to tens of millions of people around the world with draconian sanctions for electing leaders that you do not like. Why is there no accountability for Israel or Saudi Arabia for murdering journalists? It is one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a journalist in Palestine.
I deplore the loss of Shireen. She was a remarkable journalist, an American citizen, as you all know. And there too, we are determined to follow the facts and get to the truth of what happened.
Secretary Blinken, with all due respect.
I'm sorry, with respect, they have not yet been established.
Yes, it has.
No, they have not. We were looking for an independent, credible investigation. When that investigation happens, we will follow the facts wherever they lead. It's as straightforward as that. That has not yet happened, but it's something that we very much want to see happen.
Look, on Saudi Arabia, as you know, I have been arguably the leading critic in the entire Congress. I mean, I started the Yemen War Powers Resolution. We introduced that in the House. I took that to Senator Sanders. He passed it through the Senate. We passed it through the House. I think it's one of Senator Sanders' greatest achievements. We got the refueling to stop, but it's still ongoing, and it is outrageous. Outrageous, in my view, for us to be sitting down with MBS without holding him accountable for the Khashoggi murder. It is outrageous for us to be asking the Saudis for oil before they stop the war. I mean, these are lives at stake. On the killing of the American journalist who is of Palestinian origin, I signed on to a letter that was very strong that Representative Carson introduced, and I've been criticized by some from that, saying that it has to be an American investigation. It has to be an investigation led by our FBI, our State Department. It's an American citizen that's involved. That killing was horrific. That violence was totally unacceptable. And to have an objective investigation, it should be an American investigation. And there are about 60 of us who signed that letter to significant criticism from some channels, and I think that's right to do.
Blinken seemed to insist that the facts were not in yet, and that perhaps some of the diplomatic pivot that Abby seemed to be recommending in terms of distancing our relationship with Israel might be justified once the quote unquote facts were in about who was responsible for the killing. And Abby's perspective was that the facts are in, and that basically this is kind of an attempt to whitewash the incident and basically use skepticism the same way that has happened so many times with climate or the cigarette industry or whatever, saying we don't know everything yet, as a way to create distance between the event, which many people found to be shocking, including the events at her funeral where pallbearers were being attacked, et cetera, to let that slip into the annals of history without America being held responsible for its quote unquote special relationship with quote unquote democracies in the region like Israel. Do you think that Abby is right to say that we know enough for there to be diplomatic implications for Shireen's murder?
Well, Shireen's murder was appalling, and so was the interference and violence at her funeral with the pallbearers. And I spoke out at that about that immediately and forcefully at the time. I've signed the letter calling for an independent investigation. I do think Secretary Blinken is right that we need to have the investigation take place and the facts come out. I mean, to see who exactly was responsible and whether there was accountability for the person who was responsible. Now, I don't think that we can just allow Israel to conduct that investigation for the reasons that you've said, because there is not confidence on the Palestinian side that would be objective. And that's why I've called for an American investigation. And then based on that, we need to take appropriate action. Now, if some of that action, we've had times where we've had actions, our soldiers, et cetera, Abu Ghraib, others do things that are violations, and then there's disciplinary action. And if that has happened in this case, I don't know what's happened, but once we have the investigation, there should be appropriate action. And the expectation in our diplomacy should be that Israel will take the appropriate action once the facts are found.
So you're saying that 60, what is it, House members have signed a letter advocating for there to be
about 60, yeah.
So why only 60? And because it does seem to me that there's a lot of letter signing in good faith. I understand that, your powers are limited as any one person, but it does seem to feel inadequate given the gravity of the violation, the human rights violation, the free speech violation, to say, well, there's a minority of a Democratic House that is willing to even say there needs to be an independent investigation into the murder of an American journalist?
I wish there were more. I mean, it's a hard thing to sign some of those letters in terms of the perception and the politics of our time. And probably 5 years ago, there would have been maybe 10 people, Barbara Lee and a few others. So we're making progress in standing up for human rights. But this is why the progressive movement is important. And I said to people who were critical of me, I said, look, if India committed human rights violations, and times where they have, I've spoken out. I spoke out. I said, I know we disagree fully on the war in Ukraine, but I think you would agree that Putin's actions are wrong, and India, I don't think, should have abstained in the UN. And I spoke out against that. So my view of this is that we have to create the space for people to be able to speak out on human rights issues, and 60 is actually higher than these type of letters have gotten in the past.
Has Joe Biden responded in any way?
I don't think we've had an official response to it, but I do know this, that Secretary Blinken and the administration are very aware of the issue and of congressional sentiment. And I'm going to talk to the representatives who led the letter to see what our next steps should be. There were people on the letter like Representative Correa who aren't typically ones to speak out on this particular issue. So it just shows that the outrage was among many different factions of the Democratic caucus.
Well, you did mention Barbara Lee, and I wasn't going to ask about this, but real quick, do you have any thoughts about the LA mayor's race, and you are a representative from California? Many people are saying, they're going into runoff with Caruso, who, as of 3 weeks ago, was a Republican, very well known in Los Angeles, owner of The Grove, a very popular shishi dining establishment, has gotten a number of celebrity endorsements. But the belief is broadly that because there will be higher turnout in the general election with more base mainstream Democratic voters, that Barbara Lee will pull ahead. What do you make of how narrow that contest was and how quickly this billionaire, entrepreneur, I don't know how you would describe business person, was able to get on the map, as it were?
So Karen Bass, who you're talking about.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Karen Bass, of course.
Yeah, of course. I'm of course fully behind Karen Bass. I think Caruso ran a campaign basically saying clean up homelessness, but without the sense that these are human beings with dignity, and the solution is not just to take them off the street without any sense of services and a sense of mental health treatment. Karen Bass has a challenging fight. I mean, that message seemed to have resonated. I agree there's going to be a higher turnout, and Karen Bass has a good chance, but this is going to be a tough race. I personally just find it offensive that someone can just put millions and millions of dollars into a race to get an election. One of the things I thought was gratifying about 2020 is that the two candidates who put in their own money didn't do very well. Unfortunately, that doesn't work in a mayor's race or a congressional or Senate race. You can put in a lot of your money, and I think that's a fundamental problem with our democratic system. I mean, I don't have a problem with people who have done well being wealthy running, but they should run under the same rules as someone who's working class, which is you all have to go campaign not with your own resources. It's such a distortion of the process.
Yeah. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.